Welcome to Leading Church with Pastor Steve Kelly. We're aiming to create a space to talk through issues that all leaders in ministry face. We want to do it in authentic and transparent conversation that helps you as a leader feel connected and not alone. And today we're going to be looking and talking to Mike Murphy, who has got a great new book called Accelerate, a prophetic and practical blueprint to double your church. So why don't we jump into that conversation right now? Well, welcome to Leading Church Podcast with Pastor Steve Kelly, and I'm your host, Mark Hopkins. And today, obviously, Pastor Steve is not with us today. We've got one of his great friends and one of the great friends of Wave Church, Wave Collective, who has been an incredible help to us at Wave and many churches within the Wave Collective, as well as many churches across the world. So welcome, Mike Murphy, founder and CEO, director, president of Leaderscape, one of the great ministries that you can find out more about online, and you just check out on the podcast down below.
I'm going to take you everywhere that I go. That's the best introduction I've had for a long time, Mark. Great to be with you.
It's great to have you with us. Well, we are talking to you. Well, number one, you've just released a book.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into that book in a little while. And why it's really interesting for us here at this podcast is because one of the things that's highlighted your life has been helping churches and pastors succeed. And your book that you put together is actually based out of that and is your heart to see pastors and leaders and churches accelerate their ministry and their impact. Is that true?
Yeah, no, it is. One of the delights of our life is to actually come alongside God's generals. And truthfully, you know, we, particularly in the media, pastors can tend to, certain groups of them, can tend to cop a little bit of flack. And yet pastors are our heroes, Mark.
Right.
We having been in ministry for nearly 40 years, and actually in the local church ministry for about 30 of those,
right.
We do have a pretty acute understanding of what it takes.
Right.
And so anyone that is actually obeying God to serve His church, serve His people, man, we pinch ourselves. We get to come alongside them.
Well, that's good news. Well, let's dig into a little bit behind the scenes. Like, I met you. You were at Hills Christian Life Centre
113 years ago, Mark.
It feels like that. And Pastor Steve even was. I think we were both back in another church in the far western suburbs of Sydney.
That's right.
And you were, you were in. You were just up the Windsor Road and in Borkham Hills.
Yeah.
And you were at this little church at the time called Hills Christian Life Centre.
That's right.
How did you get involved there? Tell us the story.
Well, I had a pretty wild background, a Catholic background. I won't start at, I began at an early age, but then I did go wild, some life circumstances.
Okay. So you didn't grow up as a Christian?
No, I didn't. I was in a Catholic church. I was an altar boy, used to knock off the altar wine back in the sanctuary afterwards and all that sort of stuff. And every altar boy knows that was a
Well, that's a rite of passage.
A rite of, exactly, that's the right word. So and then went through a wild stage where I was terribly lost. Walked into a church one day, which was actually Christian Life Centre in the city.
Okay.
Now one of the Hillsong campuses.
Right.
A young, handlebar moustached, ponytailed Brian Houston was preaching like this, and I came to Christ.
Wow.
And I had a dramatic conversion, and then frankly just grabbed his coattails and met my wife a little while after. We met and married in 6 months, and then we moved out to the Hills area about a month after Hills Christian Life Centre began.
So you were in the first startup.
First wave,
then. That was 84 or something.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So I must have met you in Sydney Christian Life Centre because I was at Sydney Christian Life Centre in 81.
You would have seen me in the choir, Mark.
Oh, right.
Yep. No, in the choir. I was.
Okay.
I was a tenor.
Okay.
Rated myself a little bit. Yep.
All right.
Yep. But that's a former career. Career.
All right, we won't go there. So, all right, you ended up on staff at Hills Christian Life Centre.
Yeah.
How?
Oh my gosh, I'm still a bit incredulous about it, to be honest. I'd only been a Christian probably a couple of years.
Right.
And prior to that, Brian asked me to lead a small group, like they used to call them home fellowships back in the day.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd read the Bible very much, you know. And he said, you know,
Leadership pipeline, not quite
100%,
not
like
quite effective.
It was really cowboy stuff in some ways. But I'll be forever grateful.
Right.
The fact that Brian saw a diamond in the rough. I'm not saying I'm a diamond, but, you know, like I was rough. I was rough and ready. But he said, and so he gave me a go as a small group leader.
Right.
And we were newly married. Valerie was a former classical guitarist, but hadn't played for about 10 years.
I didn't know that about
I picked her guitar up and said, honey, let's get it restrung, and you're the worship leader. I'll have a go at leading this thing. And we didn't know that it wasn't normal for a group to blow up and multiply.
That's so true.
So it multiplied about 6 times.
Because Sydney was the graveyard of churches.
That's what they said.
That's what they said. Where we were was a church which was probably the mega church in Sydney, where Steve and I were at the time.
You really were. There was, and it was renowned as a real reservoir of the Holy Spirit,
right?
Miracles and the prophetic words of knowledge. Mm-hmm. It was quite amazing, which is your and Pastor Steve's background,
right. And then when Hills Christian Life Centre came, Brian brought a whole new thinking about leadership.
Yeah, that's true.
We never thought about leadership. We just, if it wasn't of the Holy Spirit, we just
in the moment.
If in doubt, cast it out.
Exactly.
Let's just pray about it.
Exactly.
You know, we didn't need we didn't need anything else.
Yeah.
And Brian came with not just the Holy Spirit and not just an understanding of the Word, but actually leadership principles from the Word. Yeah. And you seem to have picked up an awful lot of that from
again, I'm very grateful. You know, Hillsong, there's been a lot of in the news lately and so forth, but I honour those, not just the early years, but what Hillsong, what Brian has done for the church across the world. And frankly, I would not be doing what I'm doing right now.
Right.
It's funny, I asked him subsequent, I said, why did you pick me? And he said, I knew you didn't know much, but he said, I knew you loved Jesus, you loved me, and you loved the church.
Right.
And he said, I thought that's a good start.
Right.
And you know, I think it's you know, we hear every week of our lives, churches and pastors saying, hey, I need more leaders.
Isn't that the truth?
And I think that sometimes, just maybe, the bar, we set the bar a little bit high. Mm-hmm. We set the bar like in what we now know. Mm-hmm. The fact that someone gave you a go and me a go back in the day when we aren't who we are.
That's right.
We weren't who we are now. I think is the start. Jesus cast out a bunch of demons on a guy called they called Legion, and then said, go be an evangelist.
Yeah. That's right.
No, seriously. There was no Bible college. There was no. Now,
I'm
not saying that's the doctrine. You know, fresh out of demon casting out, then go and get into ministry. But I think there's something about believing in someone and seeing them the way that Jesus sees them from the get-go. That might be a clue there.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that, you know, the story is you got to take risks with people.
You really have.
And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But it all depends on what you actually look for and you first see. Because often what you see in the beginning can be a great indicator of where things could be in the next few years.
Yeah, it may be
positive and negative.
It's so true. It may be, further to what you're saying, it may be that if you don't have a few train wrecks, you're probably not you're actually probably not trusting and taking enough risks.
That's the truth. That is the truth. All right, so you were on staff at Hillsong. Well, at one of the great churches at the day.
Yeah.
You know, obviously different day than today, different things have happened and whatever. But at the time, it was huge. It was mega. It was the mega church in Australia. And you hear from God, and I can remember it. I was there. I was on team at that point. Yeah. And you going to leave us to take on a church in the southern suburbs of Sydney.
Yeah.
And what a shock.
Well, it was a shock for me too, to be frank. I was driving with my bride, and we were in America, and we were out the back of Arizona, near a place called Sedona, like red dust and rocks everywhere. And I turned to her and I said, God was stirring my heart, And I thought, because she'd only ever known really Hillsong, it was the only church our kids knew.
Right.
I said, I never thought this would happen. Like, I was planning to be there for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I said, I feel like maybe God's stirring my heart to move. She said, to my absolute surprise, we better pray about it. I thought, oops, we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
That's what our wives do. It's come to this, we're going to actually pray.
Absolutely. Yeah, and obviously I had been, but for her to even acknowledge this was a possibility.
Yeah.
And then, the rest is history. And we did take over that church that had about 40 years history prior to that.
Right.
In the southern suburbs, which was one of the other significant churches.
Significant churches in Sydney.
It
had great history, amazing. And you took it on.
Well, I did, and naively I must have been. I'd come off the ski ramp of Hillsong, which we were pretty much on a youth revival.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
God was, we were like running to keep up.
Yes.
And I just naively thought, that was kind of my only church experience.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of most churches were like that.
Right.
And this was a good church.
Right.
I'm not one to bag it, but there were some old thinkers in there.
Yeah.
And so I came off this ski ramp and I'm like, and someone bricked up a wall about 100 yards out, and it was a painful lesson where I had to listen to God and I listened to people, and to be honest, I made a mess of it for the first 12 months or 18 months. That's the truth.
Wow.
And I think God had to rebuild me, get a bit of humility back into me.
Wow.
And God did some great things for me.
So what were some of the key lessons you learned in that transition? Like, because it takes 3 to 4 years to build culture, to do the transition well.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're coming out of a mega church thinking, we're just going to just keep on riding the wave.
Absolutely.
And obviously you've got to build culture. You've got to do all the things that we talk about and we help people with. You just slammed into that.
Honestly,
the
first thing was I learned a rude lesson about myself.
Okay.
I was half arrogance and half insecurity. And they were kind of related.
That's a hard lesson.
That's the truth.
Okay.
Because we'd been involved in a great season of blessing.
Yeah.
Maybe I attribute a bit more of that to myself than what I was entitled to. So I moved into a new setting, and I honestly, I wouldn't have said it at the time, Mark. But inside, I think I thought I was all that in a bag of chips. Right. I thought I was God's gift to the Sutherland Shire.
Right.
And you can't. God can't build with that.
Right.
And so I hate to admit it. It was a painful lesson of humility, and then there was the insecurity that I carried. And God had to remind me that he had me. So one chance on one side he was sort of rebuilding me. On the other side he was assuring that I was going to be okay.
Right.
So that was the first big lesson. And then the second big lesson is you got to take people from where they are to where God is leading them, rather than where you want them to be now.
Right.
And I walked in day one. I mean, honestly, I might write another book saying how not to transition to church. And God's grace was that we ended up doing okay, and God was glorified.
The church went well.
But initially, it was not good. Wow. And I think learning to connect with people in their current, where they are now, and take them on a journey, rather than be so arrogant and blind to think that they're all of a sudden going to jump to where you think that they should be in the moment.
Right. And how did being in the shadow of a mega church impact you? Now, I know where you were is somewhat separate from where Hillsong was. But nevertheless,
about 45 minutes.
But nevertheless, you this thing's blowing up, and you are in a good way.
Yeah.
And you're just having challenges and trying to help people.
Gosh, that's a good question. I think that we were never the go-to church for Sydney.
Right.
Like at one stage we had 330 small groups, a couple of thousand people, but we were never the go-to church. If anyone was moving in, they wouldn't think, well, I want to go to Shire Live.
I want to go to Shire.
They would go to, they'd sometimes move from overseas to come to Hillsong.
Right.
So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think that I was actually oblivious and naive to it for a long time.
Okay.
Someone said to me once, in fact, it was Pastor Wayne Alcorn, the president of our movement. He says, "Hey, Murph, how do you go being under the shadow?" I think Hillsong just moved to Brisbane, and he was learning that lesson.
Right.
And I went, "Gosh, I never really thought about it. And so I was trying to be a bit of a me too, because that was my background. I was singing all Hillsong songs.
Yeah.
I was almost promoting them on a weekly basis.
Right.
And though there's nothing wrong with honouring, I actually didn't take the time to discover what our uniqueness was.
Right.
And from there, I think I realised, gosh, I've got to discover. I can't just be a branch of Hillsong without the name.
Right.
And so I think that's a key. And obviously,
So you discovered who you were.
I did. I had
and
to.
who the church was.
And you've been asked this question probably most of the weeks of your life. Well, what was it like, and how do you? I think when a Hillsong church, and they're consolidating now, I think, to be fair to say, but there was a time when Hillsong's coming to a town near you,
right?
And a lot of pastors would go, "Gosh, what do you do?"
Right.
And I said, "You be you, boo."
Right.
Like, you actually got to discover why God has got you on the planet.
Yeah.
And the more you humbly say, God, we've got something unique,
yes.
and you drive into that and you share the vision of what God's put on your heart.
Right.
There's room in the kingdom.
That's exactly right.
There's room in the kingdom for all of us, and God didn't want us all to be clones of Hillsong or Highlands or Life Church, Craig or anyone else.
Right.
He wanted us to be us.
Right. So how did you take your family on that journey? Like, because it's not just you. Now you're bringing your kids in. You've got two wonderful kids now, grown up and
three.
Great,
Yeah,
three kids.
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
right.
That's right.
And you took them all on the journey.
Yeah.
How'd you manage to do that?
Well, as in from Hillsong to the new situation.
Yeah, because most kids don't survive that.
Oh, well, how do you know they have? No, they're doing okay.
Because they're doing okay. The ones I know
doing okay.
are doing real well.
I think that kids are more hardy than I think we give them credit to. Credit for. I think, like, we're here right now in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, one of the largest Navy bases, if not the in the world.
Yes.
And so the kids that are related, they'll move every year or two, every couple of years anyway.
That's what we find. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think that just being patient with them.
Mm-hmm.
We took them on the journey. Actually, it was crazy because we were going to move, and a date was set. And Pastor Brian, he was good. It was a hard conversation to have, to say I'm moving on. Yeah. Pastor Steve Kelly says,
I remember that.
He spent a whole lot of time white-anting me so he'd get my job, But
it's just not true at all.
It's not true at all. But he was ready-made. So he was able to slip into the role.
He did.
But then another one of the key team members decided to resign in more dramatic circumstances.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was really painful.
Yeah.
And so...
Which is funny because a lot of times in my experience... That happens to pastors and leaders.
Like a double punch?
Yeah, a double punch.
That's right. So
one leaves and it's really good, but someone else underneath that, just boom, out of the blue.
We've talked to the kids already about us going. Mm-hmm. And then Pastor Brian said, hey, listen, I need you to stay for 6 months longer. Right. Just to stabilise. And again, we were submitted to his leadership. We didn't come to him, and I think this is an important lesson of team members particularly. We didn't come to him and say, we're doing this, Jacko. You want to support it, all right? Because his name wasn't Jacko anyway. No, and we said, hey, here's what we're feeling. Can we get your thoughts on that? And I actually said to him, if you're not on board with this, we're not doing it.
A lot of people won't do that. A lot of people are very committed to what they believe God is speaking to them about. Yep. And I've seen that over and over and over again play out. Why did you take that route?
I think it's biblical. I think, frankly, I think
there's a good answer.
I think it's biblical. Like, I think that,
so do
that if we can either trust God with our destiny, or are we trusting a pastor, our lead pastor? I see. The thing is, God is way more focused on wanting to do the best thing for us in terms of positioning us in the kingdom than we ever are.
Yeah.
So even if I have, and I understand that not everyone can maybe trust their lead pastor. We're all got insecurity about us. So, well, man, if I do that, and they have the conversation in their head, my idea, and I'm passionate about this now, will get slammed down. Even if you've got doubts there, surely you can trust God with that. Yeah. And it was a secure place to be, actually. And then Brian did say, I'm glad, we feel like this is God. And then there were the breaks. So our kids, we had to say to our kids, shh, you can't tell anyone. And I think one of them was 7 or something, right? That was a
That's
tough
a big
gig.
deal,
That was
yeah.
a tough gig. So there was a bit of a stop-start. And but I just think we took them on the journey. We're on mission together to take over the leadership of this amazing group of people, of God's people. We're stewarding that, and come on, let's do this as a family.
Wow.
And you know, God was kind to us there, and the kids are doing great.
You know, so you were involved in a mega church. You went from there to a good church, and you transitioned that church, and now it's going very well still, and got a great pastor and leader you handed it over to.
We did.
You did a great job of helping that transition and making that happen. And you launched into something, helping pastors and leaders in a thing you created called Leaderscape.
Yep.
Talk about that journey. Like, what made you do that? What a jump!
To be honest,
I mean, it's a leap of faith. You're going from something.
It's
your
pastor's fault. I was actually in his lounge room. So
Pastor Steve can.
He's the culprit. he's got fingerprints all over this, and I'm very grateful for him
because he brings faith to the equation.
He really does. You know, and I was actually visiting. I was at Wave Conference at the time. Shout out Wave Conference, an amazing catalyst for
if people haven't been, they need to come.
They need to bring in that faith, you know, into a leader. And so I was at Wave Conference, and we were after conference. We were just hanging out at Steve's house, and here's the thing. Something must have been percolating, but I think I was kind of pushing it down. Because one of our other mutual friends, Jared Kean, who's known as a bit of a black and white prophetic dude.
Well, way too prophetic.
So and we were just in a conversation, and he said, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, I feel kind of vocationally schizophrenic, but I can't take a pill for it." Ha ha. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I love our church, but I feel called to help God's generals." And he said, "You know why, don't you?" And I said, "Well, it sounds like you're about to tell me." He said, "You're done." I said, "I've done what?" He said, "You're done as a senior pastor. It's about time to do the other thing God's put on your heart." And I burst into tears, bad, ugly tears.
Wow.
And so then he kind of led me to Pastor Steve and to Pastor Paul de Jong, who were in the next room. And we'd known each other. We were, partners in crime, right?
Yeah.
We'd known each other for 25 plus years, whatever. And they all went, "You know what? Me too. Me three."
Wow.
And I said, "Gentlemen, you just wrecked my life."
Right.
So it was a dramatic thing. But to be honest, I think it was something God moved dramatically because I wasn't listening.
Wow.
And so then Valerie wasn't there. So I had to I'm like, oops, I need to now.
I was about to say,
tell my wife
have
that
to go
our world is about to change.
Yeah.
And so we did start Leaderscape, and God has breathed on it. And again, it's
where'd the name come from? Because it's a great name.
I can't remember.
It's like landscape.
It's
leaders
negotiating the various terrains that leaders. A lot of people go, "Is it leader escape?" And I said, "No, that's what we're trying to prevent for leaders, that they have to escape, that they can actually negotiate their various terrains."
Right.
I actually can't remember, but we were just playing with some words. I wanted leader in there because it is, things do rise and fall on obviously Jesus, but then on the leader that is at the helm of stewarding a body, a group of believers, it works. But we couldn't get. It's actually the website's the Leaderscape because someone had already flogged Leaderscape.
Okay,
so it's the Leaderscape, but we call
like
it
everything.
Yeah.
Like everything these days. Now, funnily enough, I was talking to a young leader just yesterday. He rang me up asking questions, whatever. And one of the things he was talking about, he said, we need to get onto church health. We got to church health.
Yeah.
And I said, well, don't you mean, if you're talking about church health, why don't we talk about leaders' growth, the church growth? Because surely that is actually what we're all about. I think that's something that has really earmarked everything you do. From my observation, our involvement with you, you are about not just seeing church grow, because bad things grow, unhealthy things grow,
cancer
as well as as healthy things. You're all about health and growth together. How did you get to that?
I think coming out of this happened before COVID, but coming out of COVID, there was a lot of, and there still is, a lot of focus on well-being. A couple of my great friends, Greg Surratt, in the US,
guy, yeah.
president of ARC, and Paul Andrew, former Hillsong guy.
Yeah, great guy.
They're one of many now retreat centers
Yeah.
that getting guys together
Yeah.
and just having some fun, shooting some stuff, fishing,
Yeah.
getting around
Just
the campfire,
building something in them.
and that's an incredible thing for helping guys to know you're not alone in this.
Right.
I was with Greg up in London recently, and I was talking to him. I said that I'm so on board with what you're doing, but you and I both know that's not the only answer, because once they've finished toasting the marshmallow or catching a fish, they've got to go back home.
That's right.
And so one of the greatest things I think you can do for the health and well-being of the soul of a pastor and his team is to help to give them the tools to make the thing that they signed up for
Right.
absolutely sing and dance.
Right.
To really move forward out of health, as you're saying, to really grow. There's a lot of conversation about making disciples, Mark.
Yeah.
But what I do find is there's more being said about it
Then-
than actually being accomplished.
The truth.
And so we've probably done maybe 10,000 hours with lead pastors and their teams over the last decade. And we've not just been instructing, we've been learning.
Yeah.
And so we've developed, and it sounds like an arrogant statement, what I think is close to best practice in terms of putting handles on a very clearly defined process that doesn't in any way take the Holy Spirit out of play. He's through every phase of it.
Right.
In order for pastors to go, well, you know what? I'm a visionary leader. I love preaching God's word and I love people, but it actually fills the mezzo or the middle part where it reverse engineers their vision and provides some handles on helping to give them some traction to see it become reality.
Yeah. I think that's one of the great gifts you have is you sit with a pastor, they tell you their vision, and you can actually help them create the systems and structures that'll actually help them achieve that. And how does an outside person do that better from your perspective than inside people? Because sometimes it seems like, from my observation,
Yeah.
people outside
Yeah.
see things from a different perspective that really help.
When I was lead pastoring, I wish I had me with what I now know.
Right. Okay.
Like I really, because I think when you're in it, sometimes, and particularly when you've been in it for a while, the routines, the way we do things, can appear like truth.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest impediments against what we don't yet know is what we currently do.
Yeah.
So it provides blockages.
Yes.
And I think that when things are going great, you want to know the numbers and all that kind of stuff. When things are not going great, you don't so much want to know the numbers. And back in the day, in some of the tougher moments, and I've had many of those, I learnt that denial was not just a river in Egypt, dude. Like I was in denial. I did not want to know. And I think moving from anecdote to empirics. What I mean by that is moving just from narrative and story and testimony, which I love me a good testimony, to what are we actually stewarding here? And I push pastors all the time to engage in what I would call data-driven decision making. Right. So in other words, not just bottoms on seats.
Give us an example of something like
that. For example, we've tried to benchmark everything along the discipleship journey. So rather than just say, how are Sunday's numbers or what was the offerings, which are the typical Monday or Tuesday questions, right? It's like, what are the numbers that actually make a difference to those numbers? Right. So what if we know that God says, look after, steward the state, tend the state of my flock. What that means is at every stage, get pedantic. So for example, if you, and I'll rattle these off and they are in the book if people want to get a hold of it, but if I know that for identified guests, that we need 4% identified guests to our Sunday attendance, men, women, and children. So if you've got 500 in your church, then you need 20 identified guests. So that's a compilation of guest cards, children's registration, first-time givers, and so forth. So moving the next stage, of that number, then you need 40% of those through growth track, welcome home, journey, thrive, next steps, whatever you call your thing that helps to engage people. Then if you get 80% of those from that growth track into small groups, connect groups, life groups, whatever you call them, I can tell you now that if you'll do that, you'll double in 18 months.
Wow.
And we've seen it happen.
Okay.
It's not even a surprise to me anymore.
Right.
And so rather than
so God has already given the increase according to what you're thinking.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we're not doing what we need to do to hold on.
And here's the thing: if the guests aren't there, and most of our we know what to do.
That's a real issue sometimes.
We know what to do. So we mobilise 40% of our people to be genuinely on mission on a weekly basis.
Okay.
And so the idea is it's a pipeline. I'll give you an example of how this works. Pastor Luis, who's a wonderful Hispanic brother in Los Angeles, and they had about 180 people in their church when they came to us. They bumped up to I think about 320 in 18 months by doing this. All right, so we're not talking about high flying. I mean, in my mind, he's a high flyer, but mega church, kind of got it all together, got all the resources. Nah, he's just doing his best with a beautiful community of believers in Southern California. And then he found it backed off. It went back by about 40 or 50 people.
Oh, wow.
And back to about 370 or something like that. So still considerably up from where he was. Yeah. But rather than panic, you know what he did? He went down the pipeline, down the process, and went, our people have stopped bringing people. So he was able to address that, got that kicking through again. So we're actually working with metrics that are predictable. Right. And I don't think heaven's going, come on, they've gone all corporate on me. Mm-hmm. God's going, no, they're just stewarding people like I always wanted them to. Last little thought. Imagine Jesus rocks up on Sunday morning. He's got a white T-shirt, 501s, and some dreadies. All right, and he says to the usher. He says to the usher. Says to the usher. 60s Jesus Revolution. Yeah, you've seen the movie, right?
I've seen the movie.
So and he says to the usher on the door. He says, "Hey, listen, Jesus." Yeah. He said, "Yeah, I'll be back later on. I'm here every week." But he said, "I've got Bob and Jan, and I'd love if you could look after them." Let me ask you a question. How's Bob and Jan going to be looked after that Sunday?
Yeah, fantastic.
Now, I want to get into the minds of every single person on a VIP team, a welcome team, ushers, every single person that comes within our world is sent by Jesus. And we call them God's guests.
Yeah.
So they're not just visitors. They're not just people that rocked up, not just people that had a hard week or a big night Saturday night and thought they better pay their penance by getting to church. They are God's guests.
Right.
When that's imbibed by the team, it's a game changer.
Right. I believe that.
And that's why we steward them in the way we do.
You know, it's interesting because I can remember years, over my life of, just seeing God move and do stuff. In those early days, I wish we'd have had some of this as well, because I can remember we had, I don't know whether you remember Gary Clark, but he was...
No, remember him well, yeah.
But we were in, back in the early days, a place in the western suburbs of Sydney that basically had revival. It was in the middle of where Hillsong was and where we were.
Yes.
It was and we ended up with 30, 40 just young people turning up out of nowhere. And really, to be honest, we didn't know what to do, and yet... I feel like that often there's something, God does something, breathes, and there's all these people willing to come into the kingdom. But sometimes we stop the harvest. I think sometimes we can get in the way of the harvest. Now, at the end of the day, God will be God and he'll do it, and people will find their way. But at the end of the day, I think God brings these people in to our hands, and we've got to get actually focused on the fact, as you said, God is bringing these people in.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
And I wish we had have known some of the things that we know now and put into place even here that would really have helped us even back in those early days.
No, I'm with you, and I feel the same way. If you like, I love the heart for revival. God knows our world needs a move of the Spirit of God right now. We are ripe for the picking. But I'm a bit troubled in some cases by the call for revival. Now, what I mean by that, not like but the Bible's doesn't say a lot about praying for revival. Very clearly, in red, Jesus says, pray for laborers to go and get the revival. The revival's already white, right? Sometimes I think the cry for revival is a bit of an abdication from us taking our responsibility to make disciples.
Ooh, ouch.
So if God hasn't done enough,
Right.
then it's like, God, just send revival. And again, I'm not, please hear my heart. I'm not saying don't pray, don't get fervent. But Jesus already said, the harvest is ripe. If you can just go and win souls and make disciples like I requested and commanded you to do, it was the very last thing I said, then you'll see revival, all right. Now it's partnering with the Holy Spirit. The other thing is that we know that heaven is not limited. It is, the Bible says very clearly, it's not God's will that even one should perish. So God's not. God hasn't got a trouble with numbers. Sometimes I think we stop thinking about growth in order to justify our lack of growth. So we become more teaching churches, or we've got real love in our church, or we care for the poor. Yeah, do all that. But reach a truckload more people, because it's not God's will that any should perish. So if it's not heaven's problem, what is the problem?
Right.
Why does recent stats say that 80% of churches are either flatlined or going down? That's the numbers.
Right.
That's scary. That's a lot of pastors that answered the call of God, that said yes to God, in some cases, as you said before, with their whole family, and are now looking at the same group of people every week.
Yeah, and working hard.
But
not seeing the
their
results.
tails off, yes.
But it's there, ready to come.
I believe it.
Because the field is ripe for the harvest, according to what Jesus said.
That's what Jesus said. And I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
In Luke 5, we see the crazy story of Jesus saying, hey, even though they'd been fishing all night, hey, cast your nets into the deep, boys. And you can hear it's actually a bit comical when he says, Jesus, looking around to his other fishermen brothers, we have been fishing all night.
Yeah.
Insert, we are fishermen. We know there's no fish in that lake. And so, and nevertheless, your word.
Gosh, I've heard that many times off pastors and leaders.
Nevertheless, at your word, we will do what you're saying. All right? So then they cast the net down, and voila, there's a whole lot of fish. Either heaven had a math problem that day, or God was making a point.
Yes.
The math problem was God knew the capacity of the net, so why send more fish than the net can hold? And so even when the other boat came, they nearly sunk both of them.
Yes.
So it wasn't a math problem. Jesus is saying, my capacity is not the limiting factor.
Right.
If you will, and the first whole part of this book is fix your nets. In other words, build nets tight enough, mended enough, clean enough, and large enough to contain what God is wanting to do.
Wow. Well, speaking of which, let me grab this book. Accelerate, XLR8.
Yeah, say it fast. Accelerate.
Accelerate, a prophetic and practical blueprint to double your church.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually a bit of a Trojan horse, to be frank. So the W church thing, I'm not, none of us is just, it's not about putting bottoms on seats.
No.
What inside the pages, we're going to go on a journey together to become the disciple-making pastors that every pastor really wants to be.
And it's not just a book, is it? You've actually got a whole lot of other resources that go along.
Yeah, there is.
That.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I am so, I'm so pumped about getting this in the hands of 10,000 pastors. So I'm saying,
just a small little vision.
No, honestly, I just because if 10,000 pastors make 100 disciples each, that's 1 million disciples in the next 7 years.
Wow.
And I'm not going to do it, but I want to help. And so I'm so passionate about that. If people can't afford the $21 or something like that, put your own price in there. Right. Give me what you can. Flick me something for postage and handling. But we've had guys say put $0, give us $6 for $5.95 for postage, and they can get the book.
Wow.
But alongside that, to your point, for the visual learners or the auditory learners, I studio recorded 9 master classes that go along chapter by chapter with an introductory one. There's 8 chapters, 8 chapters plus the introduction, and the audiobook in my voice. I recorded it. And so hopefully with the study guide, it's a whole package that pastors can take their team through. And you know, we're available, questions, and you know, how do we implement that?
It's great.
So it's
great.
Delighted.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been great talking with you. I hope people that are listening get a hold of your book, have a look at it, and if you check out down in the podcast notes, they'll be able to find the website.
Accelerate.book.com.
Accelerate.book.com.
XLR8book.com. Easy peasy, and they'll find the funnel to get it.
And you can be able to do it. And like I said, you've been a great help for us here at Wave, and
thanks, buddy.
And a whole bunch of our churches and our Wave Collective, as well as many, many other churches outside. And it's been great to see you on this journey of being able to help pastors and leaders.
Well, Wave is in the acknowledgements in the front, just as one of the churches that believed in me.
Right.
Like 10 plus years ago,
right,
before I think I believed in myself. And so Wave Church and River Valley and Life Church in Australia. And so I will be eternally grateful for Pastor Steve and Wave and for giving us a kickstart in what's been an exhilarating journey.
Wow. Well, thanks for coming on, Mike. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
God bless you.
Thanks, mate.
Well, thank you for joining with us today. Make sure you tune in every month for our in-depth conversations with Pastor Steve on Leading Church. Make sure you give us a like and tell your friends about us, because we would love to help them step up into everything God has for them.